All right, so we're diving deep today with this really fun episode of The Great Divide that you sent in.
It's good to me.
I'm excited to unpack it with you.
Yeah.
So, for anyone who might not have heard of it, The Great Divide is this hilarious podcast with a male host and a female host, and they kind of playfully debate those classic gender stereotypes.
Right. Right.
And in this particular episode, they tackle why men can't ask for directions and women's fascination with true crime and all the fashion choices that leave each gender kind of scratching their heads.
Yeah, I've definitely seen some of those head scratchers in my own life.
Oh, haven't we all?
Yeah, for sure.
So let's start with this whole men refusing to ask for directions thing.
Okay.
The male host in The Great Divide made this funny comment about how asking for directions is like admitting defeat and finding the destination on his own, even if it takes, 3 times longer, feels like a victory.
Mhm.
He even said victory coffee tastes better, which I kind of get.
Yeah, I could see that.
Like, I can see the appeal of a victory coffee.
Yeah, it ties into this idea that we see in some research about men being more likely to persist with problem solving on their own,
Oh,
even when help is available.
interesting.
There's this sense of satisfaction in figuring things out independently, even if it's not the most efficient route.
Yeah, and that's exactly where the female host jumps in.
Right.
She's like, why circle the block for an hour when you could just ask and get there already?
Exactly.
To her, efficiency trumps ego.
I think she's got a point there.
Right,
Yeah.
which is fair.
It's like two different operating systems. But what I think is interesting is that she also brings up this whole social aspect of it.
Oh, yeah?
She said that stopping to ask for directions isn't just about the information. It's about being polite and having a quick chat with someone, which I hadn't really considered before.
Yeah, it adds this whole other layer to the discussion.
Yeah.
And of course, the Great Divide wouldn't be the Great Divide without some humor. The male host even joked that men need, like, GPS therapists to help them overcome this aversion to asking for help.
That's funny.
It's funny because it's kind of true.
There's often a little kernel of truth in even the most exaggerated stereotype.
Absolutely.
Now, you also sent in this segment about women and true crime, and I gotta say, the male hosts' complete bewilderment at women listening to these stories about serial killers, especially alone at night, pretty relatable.
He was like, why would you do that to yourself?
Yeah.
I love the female host's perspective on this.
Okay.
She described listening to true crime podcasts like solving a puzzle. Piecing together the clues to understand how and why these crimes happened.
I see it as almost like exercising a specific part of your brain.
Yeah.
And there's actually research that suggests engaging in puzzle-solving activities can have cognitive benefits, improve memory and critical thinking skills.
Wow.
It makes you wonder if there's a link there.
Interesting. She also talked about how listening to these podcasts can be empowering in terms of personal safety.
Well,
That by understanding the patterns of criminal behavior, you become more aware of potential dangers and how to avoid them.
right. It's like a crash course in risk assessment.
Exactly.
That's a really cool way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's not just passive entertainment. It's almost like taking control of your safety by being informed.
Right.
Of course, the podcast hosts couldn't resist some playful jabs at each other. Like when the male host jokingly asked if she had a favorite serial killer.
Right.
It's a good reminder that even when discussing these kind of serious topics, humor can be a powerful tool for connection.
100%.
And speaking of humor, they had this whole bit about how a man is instantly marriage material if he's willing to watch Dateline with you.
Yes.
I'm sure many of our listeners can relate to that.
So many.
I think it speaks to how certain genres of entertainment can almost become like cultural markers in relationships. Like what we choose to watch or listen to can say a lot about our interests and values.
Absolutely.
But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, I'm really curious to hear what you think about the Great Divide's take on fashion trends, because they really went in on that one.
Oh, they did not hold back.
No, they didn't.
And I think it's really where those stereotypical gender differences really come to the surface.
Okay.
So get this. The male host was passionately defending cargo shorts and socks with sandals.
Oh, no.
And you know what his reasoning was?
What was it?
Functionality.
Well, he's not wrong about the cargo shorts having lots of pockets.
Right.
And he actually made a good point about how women's clothing often lacks practical pockets, which is a design flaw I think we can all agree on.
100%. Like,
Yeah.
where are we supposed to put our phones and keys? But of course, the female host pointed out that women tend to prioritize style over practicality,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to things like high heels. She admitted that they're uncomfortable, but she argued that they boost confidence and make her feel more attractive.
I think there's a lot to unpack there in terms of societal expectations and the pressure women feel to conform to certain beauty standards.
Right.
High heels, despite their discomfort, have become almost a symbol of femininity and power in some contexts.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how these seemingly superficial fashion choices can tie into these deeper cultural norms.
Absolutely. And she didn't let the male host off the hook either.
Yeah.
She questioned why men cling to cargo shorts long after they've gone out of style, and he fired back by criticizing oversized sunglasses.
Oh my God.
It was like watching a tennis match of fashion critiques back and forth.
What struck me was how their different approaches to trends really reflect those classic stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
The male host seemed to favor consistency, especially with tech gadgets.
Yeah.
He mentioned his trusty old gaming mouse and how he sees no need to upgrade as long as it still works.
Right.
It's like he values familiarity and functionality over novelty.
It's like they find comfort in that familiarity and expertise.
Yeah.
Whereas the female host was all about embracing the latest aesthetics, even down to her water bottle.
Really?
She talked about how she has a collection of different water bottles, each one chosen for its look and feel.
Wow.
It's like these everyday objects become a way to express her personal style.
It makes you think about how we curate our surroundings and how those choices reflect our identities.
Right.
But what's really fascinating is what these seemingly superficial fashion debates reveal about deeper gender differences.
Okay.
So for part 2 of our deep dive, let's explore what those differences might be and what they tell us about how men and women navigate the world.
I'm ready to go deeper.
Wow.
Stay tuned, listeners, because in part 2, we'll also be diving into that thought-provoking question posed by the Great Divide. If you had to pick one stereotype about your gender that you think holds true, what would it be and why?
That's a question that really gets you thinking, isn't it? It challenges us to examine our own beliefs and experiences and to think critically about the stereotypes that shape our perceptions of gender.
Totally.
We'll be back soon to explore that further.
Looking forward to it. You know, it's funny how those fashion debates in the Great Divide can seem so lighthearted on the surface, but actually hint at some pretty deep-seated ideas about masculinity and femininity.
Exactly. Like take the male host's love of cargo shorts.
Right.
Sure, the pockets are handy, but I think it also taps into this idea of men being practical and resourceful.
Uh-huh.
It's like those extra pockets symbolize preparedness, like he's ready for anything.
Like the ultimate dad uniform.
Yeah.
Always ready to whip out a Band-Aid or multi-tool.
Right.
But then you have the female host and her focus on style and aesthetics.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder if it's partly because women are often judged more harshly on their appearance than men are.
Oh, for sure.
Like there's this societal pressure to look put together and fashionable.
Yeah, I think you're right. Society definitely sends different messages to men and women about how they should present themselves.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how the female host brought up high heels.
Right.
She acknowledged that they're not exactly comfortable, but she also talked about how they make her feel more confident and attractive. It highlights this tension between comfort and the pressure to conform to certain beauty standards.
It's like those heels are a symbol of both empowerment and constraint at the same time.
Yeah,
It's complex.
it is.
But let's circle back to the male host and his love of consistency,
Sure.
especially when it comes to tech.
Yeah,
Remember how he was perfectly content with his old gaming mouse?
I do.
He even said something like, "Why fix what ain't broke?"
That really resonated with me, and I think it ties into this idea that men are often socialized to value mastery and control. Like once they've mastered a particular tool or skill, they're less inclined to chase the latest upgrade.
Interesting.
It's about sticking with what works and becoming really good at it.
It's like they find comfort in that familiarity and expertise.
Right.
Whereas the female host seemed much more open to embracing change and experimenting with new things. Even something as simple as a water bottle became a fashion statement for her.
Really?
Remember her aesthetic hydration comment?
Oh, yeah, I loved that.
I know.
I think it speaks to how women are often encouraged to find beauty and creativity in everyday life.
Yeah.
It's about taking something ordinary and making it a reflection of your personal style.
It's like they're turning the mundane into something special.
Exactly.
But, you know, as we're unpacking all these ideas from the Great Divide, I keep thinking back to that question they posed to their listeners.
Yeah.
They asked if you had to pick one stereotype about your gender that you think holds true, what would it be and why? And I'm really curious to hear what our listeners' take on that is.
It's such a great question because it forces us to move beyond those generalizations and think about our own experiences.
Right.
Have you encountered these stereotypes in your own life?
Yeah.
And if so, which ones resonate with you the most? Do any of them ring true, or do you find them completely off base?
I think it's important to remember that stereotypes, while they can be funny and relatable, can also be limiting and even harmful.
Yeah,
It's like they create these boxes that we feel pressured to fit into, even if they don't accurately reflect who we are as individuals.
absolutely. Gender is a spectrum, and each person experiences it in their own unique way.
Right.
So as we continue our deep dives,
Mm.
I think it's crucial to remember that we're talking about tendencies and patterns, not absolutes.
Of course.
Not all men are afraid to ask for directions, and not all women are obsessed with true crime.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes The Great Divide so interesting.
Yeah.
It acknowledges these stereotypes, but also pokes fun at them, reminding us not to take them too seriously.
Right, it's all about finding that balance between acknowledging the cultural patterns that shape our perceptions and celebrating the beautiful diversity that exists within each gender.
Well said. And now that we've explored those patterns and had a good laugh along the way, I think it's time to shift our focus to the potential consequences of these stereotypes.
Okay.
So for the final part of our deep dive, let's consider how these beliefs can impact our lives in more serious ways.
Let's explore how stereotypes shape our expectations of ourselves and others, and how they can create unfair pressures and limitations. And most importantly, let's talk about what we can do to challenge these stereotypes and foster a more inclusive and understanding society.
I'm ready to tackle those big questions. Stay tuned, listeners, because we're about to get real. As we've been going through all this stuff about gender stereotypes from the Great Divide, it's kind of hit me how these beliefs that seem pretty harmless can actually end up having some pretty serious consequences in the real world.
Yeah, it's like this ripple effect, you know?
Right.
What starts out as like a funny observation or just a generalization can actually like really influence how we see ourselves and how we see other people and even affect our opportunities.
Exactly. Like, think about the whole men being bad at asking for directions thing.
Right.
If a guy keeps hearing that over and over again, he might actually start to believe it.
Oh, totally.
And then he becomes less likely to ask for help even when he really needs it.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. And then on the other side of that, if women are always told that they're supposed to be super into true crime, they might start feeling this pressure to be into it,
Right.
even if they actually aren't.
Exactly.
It's like these stereotypes put us in these invisible boxes that we're expected to fit into.
Yeah, and those boxes can be really limiting.
And it's not just about, our own personal preferences.
Right,
Think
yeah.
about the workplace.
Yeah.
If men are always seen as being more assertive and logical,
Uh-huh.
they might be the ones who are more likely to get those leadership positions,
No,
even if women are just as qualified.
it's like those stereotypes create this unconscious bias
Right.
that can really hold people back.
And on the other hand, if women are seen as being more nurturing and emotional, yeah.
Then they might get pushed towards like caregiving roles.
Right.
Or they could get passed over for promotions if the job seems like it needs someone who's tough or decisive.
Exactly. It's not just about hurt feelings.
Right.
It's about real opportunities and how these stereotypes can have an impact on people's actual lives.
So what can we actually do about it? How do we challenge these stereotypes and create a more fair society where everyone has the chance to be their best selves?
I think awareness is the first step,
Okay.
We need to realize that these stereotypes exist and they can have a real impact on people.
Yeah.
And then once we are aware of them, we can start to question them and push back against them.
I like that. And we can also really try to celebrate the diversity that exists within genders.
Yes, absolutely.
Not all men are afraid to ask for directions.
Right.
And not all women are obsessed with true crime.
Exactly. We should focus on individual strengths and talents rather than making assumptions about people based on their gender. So being open-minded, encouraging open communication, and challenging those biases whenever we see them.
Yeah, it's all about creating a culture of respect and understanding where everyone feels valued and empowered to be themselves.
This has been such a great deep dive, and thank you so much for sending in this episode of The Great Divide.
It's been my pleasure.
It really got us thinking.
Yeah, for sure.
I hope you're all leaving with a sense of hope and feeling empowered to challenge these stereotypes and help create a world where people are valued for who they are regardless of gender.
It all starts with awareness, continues with action, and leads to a more just and equal society for everyone.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.